The afternoon sun hung mercilessly over the frontier town, baking its single dusty street until it shimmered like a river of gold and grit. Wagon wheels clattered past, spooking horses tied to railings. Saloon doors swung back and forth as laughter spilled into the open air, mixing with the smell of whiskey and tobacco. It was an ordinary day for most, but not for the little girl at the center of it all. She looked no older than 10. Thin as a reed, her dark hair was tangled, her cheeks streaked with both dust and dried tears. Her dress, once blue, had faded to a colorless rag, torn at the seams and barely holding together. Bare feet left faint imprints in the dirt as she shuffled forward, clutching a tiny bundle to her chest. Wrapped inside was all she had left of her mother, a scarf worn and frayed, carrying the last trace of comfort she knew. The crowd noticed her quickly. First came the whisper, then the laughter. "Look at the scarecrow," a man near the saloon sneered, elbowing his friend. Another joined in, tossing a scrap of bread into the dirt. "There's dinner for you, girl," he called, his voice dripping with mockery. The loaf landed inches from her toes, but she did not bend to pick it up. Her pride, fragile though it was, held her still. The laughter grew. Women looked away in disdain. Children pointed and giggled, and men shouted cruel names. It was as if the town had found sport in her misery, their jeers echoing like whips across her small frame. Each word, each chuckle stripped away another piece of her courage. Then the sheriff stepped forward. He was a broad-shouldered man, his vest stretched over a belly of easy living, his badge catching the light with each movement. He tipped back his hat, a smirk tugging at his lips as he studied the girl. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice loud enough to silence the others for a moment. "Look what wandered in. A beggar child, stray with no mother, no father, no place." He stepped closer, boots grinding in the dust. "Ain't worth the dirt she walks on." The crowd erupted again, laughter crashing like a cruel tide. The girl hugged her bundle tighter, her wide eyes trembling with shame. She wanted to vanish, but the sheriff's gaze pinned her where she stood. In that moment, the town's entertainment was her humiliation, and no one lifted a hand to stop it. The jeers did not fade. They grew louder, crueler, feeding on one another like flames in dry grass. Every laugh from the crowd added weight to the girl's shoulders, dragging her down until she trembled where she stood. Her bundle slipped in her arms, and she scrambled to clutch it tighter, desperate not to lose the last piece of her mother she had left. "Careful there," a ranch hand called mockingly. "Wouldn't want you to drop your treasure. Bet it's worth more than you are." The crowd roared at that. A boy no older than 12 threw a handful of dust toward her face. She flinched, coughing, her eyes stinging as grit clung to her lashes. Yet still she did not cry. She had promised herself she would never give them that satisfaction. The sheriff stepped forward again, emboldened by the laughter of his people. His smirk widened as he circled her like a wolf enjoying the hunt. "Look at you," he said loudly, making sure every ear could hear. "Rags hanging off your bones, belly empty, eyes begging for scraps. You're nothing but a shadow, a shame to this town." His words cut deeper than sticks or stones. A few townsfolk hesitated, their smiles faltering, but the sheriff's authority held them in place. If he mocked her, they would not stand against him. The girl lowered her head, dark hair falling forward like a curtain. She clutched her bundle so tightly her knuckles whitened, but it gave her no shield against the laughter. A piece of bread landed in the dirt again, and this time a boot ground it flat before her eyes. Her body shook, not from hunger alone, but from the cruel hopelessness pressing in from all sides. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The sheriff bent closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "You don't belong here," he hissed, though the crowd still heard. "Best be gone before the dogs chase you out." Tears burned in her eyes, breaking through her last defense. Her fragile pride, the one thing she had guarded, crumbled under the weight of their mockery. She hugged the bundle against her chest as if holding it could hold her together. In that moment, surrounded by laughter, with the sheriff's smirk looming over her, she broke, not because she was weak, but because the world had given her no mercy. The laughter echoed down the dusty street, but then another sound cut through it, slow, steady, deliberate. The rhythm of boots striking hard-packed earth. The crowd's jeers softened, heads turned, eyes squinting against the sun that blazed at the far end of the street. Out of the glare emerged a figure, tall and broad, moving with the kind of confidence that came from years of surviving the trail. Dust clung to his coat, its edges frayed from countless miles. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but even in shadow his presence carried weight. The sheriff paused mid-laugh, his smirk faltering. He straightened, squaring his shoulders as though to remind the onlookers who held power here. "Well now," he drawled, forcing his voice louder than before. "Looks like a drifter's wandered in. Best keep walking, stranger. Town's business, not yours." The cowboy didn't stop. His boots struck the earth with a rhythm like a drumbeat, steady, unhurried. He came to a halt just a few paces from the little girl, his shadow falling across her trembling frame. She lifted her tear-streaked face, wide dark eyes meeting the outline of this stranger. For the first time all day, she felt something other than fear. She felt stillness. The cowboy's gaze swept over the crowd, then settled on the sheriff. He didn't shout, didn't brandish a weapon. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried easily, cutting through the silence. "You all take joy in shaming a child." The words hung heavy, sharper than any bullet. The crowd shifted uneasily. A few men looked at the ground. Others shuffled their boots in the dirt. The sheriff let out a short barking laugh, though the unease in his eyes betrayed him. "She ain't worth a kind word," the sheriff snapped. "She's a stray. Best thing this town can do is send her off before she steals what little we've got." The cowboy's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady, unshaken. "No child is a stray. Not while I stand here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The girl, clutching her bundle, stared up at him in disbelief. This stranger, this man with dust on his coat and steel in his voice, had spoken for her when no one else dared. In that moment, the town's laughter died. A storm had walked into their midst, and it wore a cowboy's hat. The silence pressed down like a weight. Every eye in the street flicked from the sheriff to the cowboy, waiting to see who would bend first. The sheriff's hand hovered near the grip of his revolver, fingers twitching with restrained anger. His pride, the thing he guarded more fiercely than law itself, had just been challenged before his own townsfolk. "You've got a big mouth for an outsider," the sheriff sneered, his voice sharp enough to draw nervous laughter from a few lingering men in the crowd. "Best take it elsewhere before you choke on it." The cowboy didn't move. His hand rested loosely at his side, nowhere near the weapon on his hip. His stillness was louder than any threat. The girl clung to her bundle and inched closer, as if his shadow itself was a shield strong enough to stand against the world. "I've seen men use guns to prove strength," the cowboy said evenly, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's. "But it doesn't take strength to point steel at a child. That's weakness, plain and simple." The crowd shifted again, their unease growing. Some nodded faintly. Others kept their silence, fearful of siding against the lawman. The sheriff's face flushed with rage, his authority fraying thread by thread. "You calling me weak?" he barked, his hand jerking closer to his weapon. The cowboy took a slow step forward, his boots grinding in the dirt. "I'm saying strength is shown in who you protect, not who you shame." His voice was steady, deep, unwavering. "And if you want to harm this girl, you'll have to come through me." The words struck like iron. A hush fell so complete that the creak of a signboard in the wind seemed deafening. The girl's small hand trembled as it found the edge of the cowboy's coat, clutching it tightly. The sheriff's jaw worked furiously. But something in the cowboy's stance, calm, immovable, resolute, held him frozen. He saw not just a drifter, but a man who carried storms in his silence. To push against that would mean losing more than a contest of pride. It would mean losing control over the very town he ruled. The standoff stretched long, every heartbeat loud in the air. Then for the first time the sheriff dropped his gaze. He spat into the dirt, muttering curses, but he did not draw. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted, not with a bullet, but with courage. The street held its breath as the sheriff stepped back, his authority bruised before the eyes of his own townsfolk. No one dared speak, no one dared laugh. The tension that had boiled moments before now hung heavy, like the dust swirling in the cooling air. The girl, still clutching her bundle, looked up at the cowboy with eyes wide as the prairie sky, uncertain if this fragile shield of protection would last beyond the hour. The cowboy bent slightly, his voice meant for her ears alone. "You've got nothing to fear while I'm here." he said softly. The words seemed to untangle the knot of dread in her chest. For the first time, her shaking slowed. He straightened, turned toward the crowd, and without raising his voice, gave them their dismissal. "Show's over. Go on about your business." The silence cracked, replaced by murmurs. Some townsfolk drifted away quickly, ashamed of their laughter. Others lingered at the edges, their eyes darting between the sheriff and the cowboy, as if memorizing the moment. Few would dare to speak of it aloud, but they knew something had shifted in the marrow of the town that day. The cowboy reached down, extending his hand. The girl hesitated, torn between habit and hope. She had learned that hands often hurt, that trust often betrayed. But the memory of his steady voice and the strength in his stillness pressed against her doubt. With a trembling breath, she placed her small hand in his. He gave her a gentle nod, then led her through the parting crowd. No one blocked their path. The sheriff's glare burned at their backs, but his silence was proof enough that his power had been cracked like dry wood. At the edge of town, the cowboy stopped beside his horse, a broad-chested bay with a calm, knowing eye. He lifted the girl's bundle, secured it in the saddlebag, then turned to her. "Up you go," he said, crouching to lift her. She tensed, but when his arm steadied her and set her gently into the saddle, she felt no threat, only safety. The cowboy swung up behind her, his presence solid and sure. The townsfolk who remained watched as the pair rode away, the sound of hooves carrying them into the fading light. The girl looked back once, the jeering crowd now just shapes in the dust. Ahead lay the unknown, but for the first time it did not feel like fear. It felt like a beginning. The prairie stretched wide beneath a velvet sky. Stars flickered like lanterns hung by unseen hands, and the air carried the cool hush of night. Far from the town's cruelty, the girl sat by a modest fire, the cowboy's horse tethered nearby, its calm breath rising in steady rhythm. The flames painted her thin face in gold, softening the lines left by hunger and grief. She clutched a piece of bread the cowboy had handed her, nibbling in small, cautious bites, as though she feared it might vanish if eaten too quickly. Each swallow seemed to anchor her more firmly to this new reality, that someone had chosen kindness over scorn. The cowboy sat across from her, legs crossed, hat resting on his knee. He tended the fire with a stick, saying little. His silence was not the same as the townsfolk's mocking hush. It was steady, patient, a silence that left space for her to breathe. After a long pause, the girl finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, "Why did you help me?" Her eyes shone in the firelight, wide with both wonder and doubt. The cowboy's gaze lifted, meeting hers without hesitation. "Because no child should face the world alone," he said simply. The words, plain as prairie grass, carried more weight than any sermon or oath. Her throat tightened, but not from sorrow this time. A tear slipped down her cheek, surprising her. She quickly brushed it away, though her lips curved into something faint and unfamiliar, a smile. The cowboy shifted, pulling his coat tighter around her small shoulders. "Rest easy," he murmured. "Tomorrow will look brighter than today." For the first time in longer than she could remember, the girl let herself believe it. She leaned slightly against him, her body finally surrendering its tension. The fire crackled, the horse snorted softly, and the vast night wrapped them in its quiet embrace. Above them, the stars turned, heralding a new day that waited just beyond the horizon. Whatever trials lay ahead, the girl no longer faced them with empty hands and a broken spirit. She had been given something greater than food or shelter. She had been given hope. And as dawn's first light touched the prairie, it revealed not a frightened orphan, but a child who had been seen, defended, and for the first time believed to be worth saving.